Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, guess what? There are debates going on in the state capitol over all sorts of things, and no debate is more important and more lively, I think, than the debate over school choice. That, and guess what? Our popular financial literacy update, all of that and more. Pennsylvania politics and government in depth and in detail, and guess what? It all starts right now.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hey, welcome back to the program. Well, we're going to talk about school choice. We're going to talk about some alternatives to school choice. Joining me, sitting across from me, is Ron Cowell. He's the president of the Education Policy and Leadership Center. He was a state House member and chaired the House Education Committee for many years. Next to him is Tom Gentzel, the executive director of the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. All right, very quickly. Number one, I'm on Ron's board. Number two, I've done research. As everybody knows, I'm a pollster. I've done polls on the subject of school choice and have done one for PSBA. I also want to point out that we had none other than Senator Piccola, who's in favor of vouchers, on the program. After this program, we will schedule again supporters of school choice. We're going to have supporters and opponents on. Supporters, Piccola, opponent. I don't think there's any doubt about it. We'll put you in the neutral category. We'll see what you have to say, Ron Cowell. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. Who wants to explain what vouchers are? Ron, explain what vouchers are to our folks.
Well, it depends what year you're talking about. 15 years ago, Governor Ridge introduced a voucher proposal that was pretty straightforward. It would allow students who were enrolled in a non-public school to have a state government paid for voucher of a certain amount that they could use to offset tuition in whatever non-public school they wanted to go to. The current proposal that as of this moment I think has not yet been introduced, although it has a label, Senate Bill number 1, is a lot more complicated. First of all, it does not create an opportunity for all kids who are in non-public schools. It focuses on kids who are from relatively poor families, and in the first year of a 3-year phase-in, it will focus on kids who are relatively poor, who are in schools that are not doing well. Okay. They're not achieving adequate yearly progress. In this case, though, the voucher is often much larger than it would have been during the Ridge years. Although there is no uniformity, because the value of the voucher, according to this proposal, will be determined by how much money that school district is getting from the state. Okay. And so in some instances it'll be a few $100s. In the case of Harrisburg, it could be $9,000.
Okay. Now, you anything to add just to the description of it? We'll get to your position in a minute.
Well, just two things, Terry. One is I think words are important, and the advocates of this plan are talking about school choice. This really isn't just about choice. This is about using tax dollars to support that choice. I'm sure we'll talk about that more. And the other kind of word that's important is the qualifying schools that we're talking about, the ones that would be eligible for these vouchers, are defined as persistently failing. But if you read the bill, which just came out yesterday before we were taping this, the whole point is that persistently failing means a school that's on a list for 1 year. Yeah. So I think it's important that we're having this conversation and that we're talking about what the words mean, because what they appear to say and what they actually mean are two different things.
All right. So now, I want to get to the cost of this and where the money's going to come from. We're going to have to run to a break. But the point is, this seems to have, Ron, you've spent a lot of time on this as a former lawmaker, a better chance of, I'm not saying it will pass. Looks like with these sizable Republican majorities and many of the members favored, and some Democrats do, to be fair, this has a better chance of passage than perhaps any time that you can recall, yes or no?
Well, I think there are a number of things you've got to keep in mind. 15 years ago, the House Education Committee put out a unanimous report, Republicans and Democrats unanimously saying vouchers were a bad idea.
Right.
This year, it would be difficult to get any kind of consensus out of the legislature on most issues.
That's true.
But 15 years ago, again, there was hardly any other school choice available. Today, we have charter schools, cyber schools, many more kids being homeschooled. So the environment is totally different in terms of context for this debate.
And when we come back, I know you have some. You're into a plan, and we want to talk about what you might do. But when we come back, I'm going to ask Tom Gentzel, why is the school boards and other folks against it? As I said, we'll have folks who are in favor of it. We've already had them. We're going to be balanced on this program. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by PAConstructionJobs.com. For more information about rewarding careers in the highway construction industry, visit PAConstructionJobs.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're talking about the voucher school choice with Tom Gentzel from the school boards and Ron Cowell from the Education Policy and Leadership Center. All right, your organization is, to put it mildly, dead set against this. Why are you opposed to this?
Well, several reasons. First of all, if we're talking about school choice, as was mentioned before, there's a lot of choice within this system. Charter schools, cyber schools, magnet schools, they're all offered without any tuition charge to parents. So there's a lot of choice already. When we look at really a tuition voucher plan, though, there have been other examples around the country, and there's no clear evidence that that's going to improve student performance. We do know, though, it's going to cost a lot of money. There are a lot of questions about how this is going to work. We know that checks are actually going to be written to parents, tax dollars, that they're going to have to endorse and turn over to a non-public school. And our reading of the legislation is there's no accountability for those non-public schools that are receiving tax dollars in terms of reporting student performance or financial. But one other quick question, Terry. There are at least 3 sections of our Pennsylvania Constitution that very clearly make this not permitted. I mean, I've heard people say, well, you know, there's a Supreme Court decision, U.S. Supreme Court, that kind of held that vouchers can work. They were not looking at the Pennsylvania Constitution. Right. So there's a whole different tradition here about separation.
Now, I hear the critics of it also say that this would come out of the school subsidy, meaning that schools would not get additional money, but if a kid lives in school district A and goes to, let's say, program B outside of it, the money would come out of school district A's budget or funds that get from the state.
Well, that's absolutely right.
Is that correct?
First of all, we're talking about some of the least wealthy districts in the state, obviously, and they're going to be seeing money leaving them following these students. Those districts, of course, don't see their costs necessarily go down. I mean, as we often say, unless you have 30 students leaving one grade level and we can eliminate that teaching position, most of the overhead costs continue. In fact, it's a little worse than that because that district now will be responsible for providing transportation as well to those students when they leave.
As well. All right, now your argument is, I think, Ron, that there are alternatives to this, and you're actually exploring those. Talk a little bit about what ELPC is going to entertain.
Well, certainly there's going to be a lot of rhetoric around and a lot of emotion around a voucher debate. We think that it's important to get beyond that, and we want to try to be an honest broker on this issue or these issues. And try to identify the legal issues, try to identify the financial issues, try to identify the other big policy questions that ultimately legislators need to deal with, but that the public needs to be aware of as well. Because this is complicated stuff, and as I said earlier, this current proposal is a heck of a lot more complicated than what Governor Ridge proposed 15 years ago. Secondly, I think it would be a mistake if we just have a debate about you're for or against vouchers. It needs to be a much broader debate about school choice.
And how about learning?
And it needs to be a debate from a kid's standpoint. What kind of real options are being made available to kids? I mean, one of the things we lose sight of often is that when we talk about vouchers, there is an argument to be made that kids will be empowered by having a check. But on the other hand, under usual voucher proposals, there is no guarantee of access. It's still the school that gets to decide whether it's a public school or a non-public school. Under these proposals, it's still the school deciding whether they want to take this kid. So kids would have a very limited right, even if they have a check. The other thing that's important to note, this goes back to the financial issues. The current proposal, again, because it's complicated, needs to be examined more carefully, but it seems that it would have maybe the unintended consequence, or certainly the consequence, of taking more money away from a poorer school district than from the wealthiest school district, because what's being taken away is the amount of state help. Poor districts obviously get a lot more state help, so the financial impact will be far greater on poor districts than on richer districts.
All right, we're going to go to a break. When we come back, I want to continue this discussion, but I want to go to a different angle. I want to talk about the costing out, additional monies that schools have gotten that they're not likely to get, and what these two gentlemen think about what that all means, when particularly tied to school choice. That and more, popular financial literacy update, end of the program. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. School choice is the topic of the moment. Tom, you wanted to follow up on a point that Ron made.
No, I just wanted to say I commend Ron and EPLC for what they're doing. I think we need a much larger discussion. I mean, really what the discussion around vouchers is talking about is how do we redefine the public school system, because it's going to dramatically change it. And the question is, what should that look like? The advocates of this particular bill want it passed immediately, as quickly as possible. I think we need the larger discussion. You know, there's an irony because school districts are required to do strategic planning. Right. We don't have a strategic plan for public education in the state. I think this would be a great time to do
You also have, Ron, I won't accuse you of helping to create some, but the schools also have a lot of mandates, right, that they have to perform. Is it time now to take a look at those mandates that have been imposed by the legislature over the years?
Sure. Well, during the Rendell administration, there was an opportunity for school districts to ask for waivers of certain mandates. Often the debate is not is not about the utility or fairness of the mandate. It's really about who's going to pay for it.
Yeah.
But there were waivers granted. We've got a charter school experience where charters operate under a lesser set of regulations. Ultimately, the question is what's going to be the impact on student achievement. And there's not a whole lot of evidence out there that eliminating all the requirements, set aside the money issue, eliminating all the requirements will improve student achievement. Ultimately, that's got to be the question we ask. What's the impact on student achievement?
Well, very quickly, I mean, we did a study on charter school student achievement, and we found a really mixed bag. Some are doing a great job. Many are not. And that's why the notion that choice itself is going to improve student achievement, there really isn't evidence of that. I think we need the larger discussion about how do we want to define public education, what are the options, and how do we fund it all as a complete system.
And we need a discussion we've not had, and that is a discussion about public school choice as well. We have some choice within a school district, but that's at the discretion of a local school board. We do not have what some states have, and that is a right for a kid to go to any public school that they choose, within their district or even outside of their district boundaries. That needs to be part of the debate.
Do you think is that something that you agree with that? It should be part of the debate, or does that create a lot of disruption?
We have students going from district to district now on a limited basis, so we can have that discussion. But again, what we do in this state is we tend to take one issue at a time and debate it, rather than talking about the interplay between all of them.
Well, we're about out of time, but maybe we'll get you guys back at some time. We didn't talk about funding, the increases that basic education got for the last couple of years because of the costing out study, which helped seem not likely. There now will be gone, and there will be additional fiscal pressures, financial pressures on schools. Yes, do you agree with that?
The biggest pressure is going to be to replace the $654 million of federal stimulus money. The state needs to replace that so districts don't get less help than they got last year.
I understand, as opposed to the stimulus money, which helped, or the costing out study money, which helped them to get more, right?
Right.
All right, we're out of time. No, we're not. We're going to go to a break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to have the financial literacy update. We're out of time for this, but we'll be back.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Financial literacy update time. Joining me, as often is the case, is Mike Wishnow. He's a senior VP with the PA Credit Union Association. And who else is on this program? Rick Wargo. He's their lawyer. We always need lawyers. Talking about lawyers. No, I'm serious about this. We got this federal law. It changes some, what credit card companies can do, what financial institutions can do. Why should anyone out there in our viewership care? And I know you're going to tell me. Go ahead, Rick.
The consumer should care because since 2009, a lot of things have changed, enhancing consumer rights in terms of more advanced notice on change in terms, more clear rules like on when your grace period begins and ends. But what the consumer also wants to be careful of and concerned of as financial institutions manage these changes, they're going to change the terms and conditions of the accounts.
And we're not talking about plastic here now, right?
Right. Debit and credit cards.
Debit and credit cards.
For the most part.
Go ahead.
And just that, don't ignore those annoying things that come in the mail because there could be a change in terms notice in there, and you want to know how your card is going to behave going forward.
Now, they say change of terms. Now, it'll often appear. I must tell you, the bottom of these glasses are bifocals. Guys, and I have trouble looking at these. I usually say, give it to my wife and say, please understand it. But go on.
Well, what's happening is that things are being repriced. And things had been repriced in the past, but consumers really weren't notified. They just, all of a sudden, the interest rate went up, or all of a sudden the annual fee went up, or all of a sudden the reward points were cut. Now, anytime something occurs, they have to send you a change in terms notice. And so if you see at the top, change in terms notice, look at it. I mean, for people that pay their credit cards off every month, a change in term that increases an interest rate probably doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, right.
Correct. But for somebody who carries a balance, it's very important.
Yeah. So I've noticed, unless I'm wrong, that there are increases in fees. That's one of the unintended consequences of this, right? So what should people, I know you're telling everybody, pay attention, change. It looks like we're seeing an increase in interest rates. Is that correct? Some companies yes, some companies no?
Potentially, as financial institutions get used to the Card Act and more recently get used to the Dodd-Frank Act, there is a possibility that there's going to be repricing. In terms of the fee side of the house, right now we're in a little bit of a no man's land. We're going to bring up the dreadful subject interchange, where how payments get moved when you swipe your debit card at your favorite store or at Starbucks to buy a cup of coffee. How the fees are going to get allocated among banks and merchants is going to change probably by July of this year.
Does that raise our rates?
Does not raise your rates, but it could change how your bank or credit union structures the terms of the account.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, frankly, it's likely that consumers are going to pay one way or another.
Yeah.
What's happened?
Is
that a surprise,
welcome
right?
to the real world,
Washington
right?
changes the regulation, consumers pay one way or another.
I got it.
Essentially what it is the merchants have successfully lobbied to get a cut in the portion that they pay for the back end of the debit card swipe system that we're used to. They would typically pay for the service as well, and you're saying their payments will be lowered. Is that right? Correct. Typically, they pay roughly 50 cents to the financial institutions for
every transaction
on a debit card.
On a debit card. Okay.
Okay. The new Federal Reserve proposal, which is just a proposal at this point, is talking closer to 12 cents per transaction. So that difference has to be made up. And that difference will be made up by the credit card issuers, whether it's Bank of America or a small credit union.
I mean, one possibility then, Rick, is that the interest payments or some other fees will be attached. Is that correct? Yes, or am I wrong about that?
No, you're exactly right. Somewhere, as we reshuffle this deck, everyone's going to try to recoup their costs. Interest rates are pretty sensitive. You can't be too far out of line with your competition, but fee-wise, so could we see later this year the day's return of, okay, after 5 or 10 free debit transactions a month, you're going to pay a quarter a piece or 50 cents a piece? We hope not, but we're here to let the consumer know that's a possibility.
What about annual fees?
And when you're
what about annual fees?
Well,
are there annual fees involved?
You're talking about a debit card, and there are some annual fees, but usually a debit card is tied to a checking account.
Right.
So what you can see is increases in minimum balances, less interest paid on the checking account.
You have a minimum balance you'll pay. I got it.
Right. So they're going to reprice, and the other thing is rewards.
I'm glad we have you guys on here because, you know, helping our viewers out. It's all confusing to me. There ought to be some way to simplify it. I realize this is a complicated world. Before I let you go, I do want to ask you one other question on another subject. What's going on with mortgages these days? One of you, I noticed that, you know, we have a lot of mortgage foreclosures. Are interest rates, are they still relatively low? Do any of you see them rising in this year, or do you think they stay low? The Fed doesn't look like it's, you know, no one looks like they're doing anything. What crystal ball time?
All right, crystal ball time. Mortgage rates, I think, will depend a lot on what the Federal Reserve does. As I hate to say this, is there going to be another round of quantitative easing? How will the markets react to that? Pennsylvania, in terms of foreclosure, is relatively stable.
Right.
We're not the sand states that have.
Not Florida and Nevada,
Correct.
Particularly Nevada. All right, one other question. We're running out of time. Do you think that, well, first of all, is this about as good a time to refinance, you know, to refinance a home or to buy a home in terms of the cost, you know, that for banks and credit unions like yourself? Is this as good time as it gets?
Probably.
As good as time as it gets?
Probably. And the reason is, you know, rates are at historic lows. It's a buyer's market with respect to purchases. You know, housing prices are at historic lows. They've dropped, you know, from 2, 3, 4 years ago.
If you can sell your own home.
If you can sell your own home. And the other
problem.
thing is if you have good credit. Because frankly, credit has tightened, and for those that have good credit, it'll be great. For those that don't, they'll struggle.
And we've talked about that before, you know, on this show many times about the credit rating and the credit cards and how you do with that. And that will, I'm sure, be some of the themes of future subjects on here. Correct?
Yeah.
All right. I'm glad we have you on to straighten this out. It's above my pay grade, I'm telling you. All right. Thanks for watching the Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well and stay financially informed too.